There is a story like this. Langdon Gilkey is a young American teacher who is incarcerated in the same prison as Eric Liddell. In his book Shantung Compound, Gilkey recounts that Eric Liddell was a hero to every boy on the camp and to many adults. He works tirelessly to lift people's spirits, to share his faith in Christian life, both with his selfless actions and his testimony. In February 1945, Eric Liddell died in that concentration camp of a brain tumor at the age of 43. In grief, Gilkey wondered where Elijah's God was, while letting a respectable man like Eric Liddell die. Why is there no miraculous deliverance from the dark prison place? And where were the trains? Of course they are always there, as is God. But Elijah-style deliveries are the exception, not the rule. In fact, it is unique. It only happens once. After all, even Jesus only ascended through the cross. We must follow the example of our Master who served to the end, not expecting to be rescued from death, but confident that when our work is finished, we will be delivered through death to come to God's presence. And today we are going to tell you the story of the prophet Elijah and the chariots when he was taken to heaven by God, so that you can understand that salvation is ultimately done by God and his messengers, even after you are dead. Before that, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any Bible-related content. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit, I pray that you receive many blessings from God. Amen. Let's get started. There was a chariot of fire, and Elijah ascended into heaven. Excerpt from the second book of Kings. When God wanted to take Elijah to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were leaving the land of Gilgal. When they arrived in Jericho, Elijah said to Elisha, "Sit here, the Lord has sent you to the Jordan River." Elisha replied, "In the name of the living Lord and taking my life, I swear that I will not leave you." Then they both went down to Bethel. 50 disciples of the prophet also followed them and stood a distance, and they stood on the banks of the Jordan. Elijah rolled up his robe and slammed it into the water. The water immediately turned in two, and they crossed the river in a dry way. When it was over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Whatever you want, please, and let me do it for you, before you are taken away from me." Elisha replied, "I want to be twice as good as my mind." Elijah said, "I ask for something very difficult, but if I see you while you are taken away from me, it will be done, but if you don't see it, you can't." As they continued to walk and talk, there was a chariot of fire and a horse of fire that separated them. And in the whirlwind, Elijah ascended to heaven. When Elisha saw this, she cried out, "Father, Father, you are the chariot and the driver of Israel." And Elisha saw no more of her teacher, and he took his garment and tore it in half, and took the robe which Elijah had dropped, and went back, and stood on the bank of the Jordan, and took the robe which Elijah had dropped, and smashed it into the water, but the water did not turn out. He cried out, "Where is the God of Elijah now?" And he smashed into the water again, and the waters parted in half, and Elisha passed. That is the word of God. The king of Syria was on the hunt for God's prophet Elisha and found him in Dothan, a city on a hill. At night, the king sent an army with chariots and horses to Dothan. When it was daylight, the king's army besieged the city. 2 Kings 6:13-14. When Elisha's servant woke up and went outside, he saw the army coming to arrest the prophet. He cried out, "Oh, Lord, what are we going to do?" Elisha replied, "Do not be afraid, for those with us are greater than those with them." Then the prophet prayed, "Open the eyes of my servant, O Jehovah, that he may see." The Bible continues, "The Lord opened his eyes, and he saw a mountain full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha." 2 Kings 6:15-17. What lesson can we learn from this incident? Elisha remained calm when surrounded by the Syrian army because he trusted in Jehovah and saw that he was protecting him. Today we do not expect to receive miracles, but we are aware that Jehovah is protecting his people as a group. In a sense, we are also surrounded by horses and chariots of fire. If we see the horse and the chariot with the eyes of faith and always rely on God, we will be at peace and experience his blessings. Psalm 4:8. Consider how we benefited from other events in Elisha's life. On one occasion, when Elisha was plowing the field, the prophet Elijah approached him and threw his robe over him. Elisha understood the meaning of that action. He held a feast, said goodbye to his parents, and left home to serve Elijah. 1 Kings 19:16-21. His willingness to do whatever God wanted him to do Elisha became an instrument in his hands and later served as Elijah's successor prophet. Elisha probably served Elijah for 6 years. During that time, Elisha was the one who used to pour water on Elijah to wash his hands, 2 Kings 3:11. In those days, people had the custom of eating with their hands, without knives, forks, etc. After eating, the servant poured water for the master to wash his hands. So at least Elisha had to do some lowly things. However, he considered serving Elijah a privilege. Today, many Christians share in various forms of full-time service. In doing so, they are motivated by faith and a desire to serve Jehovah to the best of their ability. For example, some brothers and sisters are willing to leave their families to serve at Bethel homes or to participate in construction projects. Perhaps they do things that many consider inferior. Nevertheless, no Christian should view such things as trivial or meaningless because Jehovah values all the work of his servants. Hebrews 6:10. Before God carried Elijah up into heaven in a whirlwind, he sent him from Jinjah to Bethel. Elijah told his servant not to follow him, but Elisha replied, "I have not left you at all during the journey." Elisha twice again advised Elisha to stay, 2 Kings 2:1-6. Just as Ruth was attached to Naomi, Elisha did not depart from Elijah, Ruth 1:8-16, 17:17. Why? For Elisha valued the privilege God had given him to serve Elijah. Elisha set a good example for us. If we receive a privilege in God's organization, we will treasure it if we always remember that we are serving Jehovah. There is no higher privilege. Psalm 65:4-84-10. As they were on their journey, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what you want me to do for you," like Solomon's prayer many years earlier. Elisha also prayed for something that would help him to serve Jehovah better. He said, "Please give me 2 parts of my spirit," 1 Kings 3:5-9, 2 Kings 2:9, liturgical hours. According to the law, a person's firstborn son received 2 portions of inheritance, Deuteronomy 21:15-17. So it was like Elisha asking to be Elijah's spiritual heir. Moreover, it seems that Elisha wanted to have the same courage as Elijah, who was very zealous for Jehovah. How did Elijah respond to the servant's plea? The prophet said, "Thou shalt ask for a difficulty. But if you see me when I am taken up from you, you will be as you say otherwise." It is not possible. It seems that Elijah's answer had 2 meanings. First, only God could decide whether Elisha would receive what he asked for or not. Second, to receive it, Elisha had to remain faithful to Elijah, no matter what happened. What did God think about Elisha's pleasurable 2 portions of Elisha's spirit? The account says they kept going and talking to one another. And behold, there was a chariot and a chariot and a chariot splitting between them. Elijah ascended to heaven in a whirlwind, and Elisha saw it. That was Jehovah's answer to Elisha. When Elisha saw Elijah being raptured, he received 2 portions of Elijah's spirit and became the prophet's successor. Elisha picked up the robe that Elijah had left behind and put it on. Now that robe is a sign that Elisha is God's prophet. The evidence of this appointment was even clearer when he later performed the miracle of turning the waters of the Jordan River. Witnessing Elisha being taken up to heaven in a whirlwind must have left a deep impression on Elisha. After all, one cannot see horses and chariots with fire every day. This was a sign that Jehovah had accepted Elisha's plea. When God answers our prayers, we do not see horses and chariots of fire, but we can see that God uses unparalleled power to ensure that His will is done. When we see Jehovah blessing the earthly part of His organization, it is as if we see His invisible chariot in motion. Ezekiel 10:9-13. Elisha had many experiences that convinced him of Jehovah's fearsome power. The truth is that his spirit helped the prophet perform 16 miracles, double the number of miracles Elijah performed. The second time Elisha saw the horse and chariot with fire was during the danger in Dothan, as described at the beginning of the article. Despite being surrounded by enemies in Dothan, Elisha remained calm. Why? For he had cultivated strong faith in Jehovah. We need the same kind of faith. Therefore, let us ask God to give us the Spirit to help us express our faith in other aspects of the Spirit. What happened in Dothan also gave Elisha solid reason to trust in Jehovah and the angelic armies. The prophet realized that God had sent a mighty army of angels to surround the city and its besiegers. He delivered Elisha and his servant by blinding his enemies, 2 Kings 6:17-23. At that difficult time, as in other situations, Elisha showed absolute faith and trust in Jehovah. Like Elisha, let us trust in Jehovah, Proverbs 3:5-6. In doing so, God will have mercy on us and bless us, Psalm 67:1. Granted, we are not literally surrounded by horses and chariots of fire, but in the Great Tribulation. Jehovah will protect us as an international brotherhood, Revelation 7:9-14. Until then, always remember that God is our refuge, Psalm 62:8. About the story of Elijah, the great prophet of Israel. The Bible doesn't really say that Elijah rode in a chariot to heaven, but that is an assumption, as there was a chariot and fiery horses at the scene, along with a whirlwind. It would have been logical for Elijah to get into the car and stop in front of him, his student. Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken away from you? May I inherit twice your soul?" Elisha replied. Elijah realized that the request was not his to approve. Therefore, he made the fulfillment of the request dependent on a condition that was only in God's hands. Elijah replied, "You have asked for a difficult thing, but if you see me when I am taken away from you, it will be yours, otherwise it will not." Asking for a double portion of Elijah's soul is a reference to the right of the firstborn described in Deuteronomy 21:17 and indicates that Elisha's request is to inherit Elijah's office and prophetic gifts. In response to that request, Elisha actually witnessed Elijah's most astonishing departure. And as they were going and talking to one another, suddenly a chariot and the horses of fire appeared and separated them. And Elijah ascended into heaven in a whirlwind, verse 11. The means of transportation that God chose for Elijah contained several important symbols. The horses talk about strength and speed. The chariot is about protection and victory. The whole being by fire is about glory. God quickly brought his servant into the glory of heaven triumphantly, protecting his soul all the way. The prophet, who had shown a burning zeal for God and had indeed called fire down from heaven many times, 1 Kings 18, 2 Kings 1, was now taken up to heaven in the fire, preparing for Moses to serve, Exodus 3:1-10. Heavenly fire is associated with angels elsewhere in the Bible. When God opened the eyes of Elisha's servant, he saw an army of angels, described as horses and chariots, round about Elisha, 2 Kings 6:17. The angels were not mentioned when Elijah was raptured, but the fire of heaven, the glory of heaven, certainly was. Perhaps those who saw Jesus taken up from the Mount of Olives and hidden in a cloud will be reminded of Elijah's departure, Acts 1:6-9. The disciples who witnessed Jesus' ascension were dedicated to serving God for the rest of their lives, just as Elisha did. We don't know if Elijah knew that he was going to heaven in such a spectacular way, but he knew that he was about to be taken out of Elisha. The way that Elijah was taken to heaven, with the chariot and the horse of fire, may have been mainly for Elisha's sake. God accepted Elisha's request to receive Elijah's double strength, and God made sure that Elisha knew the condition had been met. Elisha had to witness Elijah being taken to heaven, and there was no way he could miss the scene that God had revealed. In taking Elijah to heaven in such a violent way, God assured Elisha that he would succeed Elijah in the prophetic ministry with double divine power. Witnessing Elijah ascend to heaven with fire horses, chariots, and tornadoes will have a profound impact on Elisha throughout his ministry. If he ever doubted that he had been chosen by God, he could recall the glory he witnessed that night. If he ever doubted the power of God, he might recall the chariot and the horses of fire. The great display of God's power over Elisha equipped him to serve. Such a performance is reminiscent of God revealing his power to Moses at the burning bush and taking Elijah to heaven. God foretold Christ's ascension. The prophet Elijah, a figure higher than the Old Testament, is a giant. Today, the focus shifts to Elisha, who succeeded Elijah and was a great figure in his own right. But we think that the emphasis in the stories about these men is not just aimed at their extraordinary deeds or heroic achievements. One thing we can be sure of whenever we read the Bible, no matter what the story is, no matter who the individual characters are, no matter how shining their actions shine, the living God is the true hero of the story. And those who know this God, no matter who they are, famous or anonymous, discover that their lives have infinite meaning because of that result. Both Elijah and Elisha have served together as God's prophets for a time. A number of years had passed since Elijah, at the Lord's command, anointed Elisha as his successor. We can imagine that the young prophet spent those years serving as a kind of apprenticeship alongside the elders. But now things are about to change. Elijah knew that the time for his departure was near. Then, as the Lord was about to lift Elijah into heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elisha said to Elisha, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "O living Lord, and O living Lord, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The sons of the prophets in Bethel went to Elisha and said, "Do you know that the Lord will take your teacher away from you today?" He replied, "Yes, I know, be silent." 2 Kings 2:1-3. They traveled throughout central Israel, Elijah and Elisha together, participating in this strange dance. They walked from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho, and at every turn Elijah tried to leave Elisha behind, perhaps to free him from his oath of service, perhaps to test Elisha's determination and commitment. And each time, Elisha clung to Elijah like a thorn in a long-haired dog. "I will not leave you like Ruth, faithful in the previous generation. Elisha will not waver, I won't turn back." With persistent perseverance, he followed his master to the end. Meanwhile, everywhere they went, the sons of the prophets, the equivalent of a seminary of student pastors in the Old Testament, warned Elisha that he was about to lose his master, a fact the young prophet knew all too well. The climax of the story is when Elijah and Elisha move across the Jordan River into the wilderness across the river. This was Elijah's home territory, just as it would have belonged to his future successor, John the Baptist. But even more impressive are the similarities that are now emerging between Elijah and Moses. Moses and Elijah are two prominent figures in Israel's Old Testament history, as evidenced by their appearance together with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration in the Gospel. See Matthew 17:1-13. Now Elijah will leave the scene in the same way as Moses, and almost exactly in the same place. When Moses turned the sea with his stick, Elijah also created a miraculous path through the waters of the Jordan River by striking it with his curled robe. And when God brought Moses to himself, hiding his body so that it would not be found, then he would take Elijah out of the wilderness in an even more spectacular way, ignoring death and taking him straight to heaven. Now that moment is approaching. Elijah asked Elisha what he could do for him. "Please leave a double part of your spirit on me," Elisha replied. He did not ask for double the power so that he could become a doubly great prophet. No, according to Old Testament law, a double portion of the inheritance is reserved for the firstborn son. Elisha simply begged to be allowed to be Elijah's son and spiritual heir. He wanted to be Elijah's successor in office, to grab his cloak as he actually did. "Thou hast asked for a hard thing," saith Elisha, "however, if you see me when I am taken away from you, it will come to pass one last prophecy from the old man." And so it all went. The biblical narrator reports that. As they continued to talk, behold, the chariots and fire horses separated the two of them, and Elijah flew into the sky in a whirlwind. And Elisha saw that and cried out, my father, the chariots of Israel and their riders." And you don't see him anymore. He took the robe of Elijah that had fallen from him and returned, standing on the bank of the Jordan River. Then he took the robe of Elijah that had fallen from him and smashed it into the water, saying, "Lord, where is the God of Elijah?" When he smashed into the water parted to the sides, and Elisha passed. Elisha's call, as confirmed his request, was granted. He witnessed the horrific scene when Elijah ascended to heaven. Supernatural chariots and fire horses, symbols of God's supreme glory, were revealed to him. God's invisible presence and terrifying power are manifested. In a brief moment, the boundary between this world and the other becomes transparent, and the spiritual powers of the invisible world become visible. He took clouds as a chariot, rode on the wind, made messengers into wind, and made servants into fire. Elisha was given a gift that few mortals had ever given. He is allowed to see through the darkness of this world to the ultimate reality. He witnessed Elijah's movement to heaven. Try to ask Elisha how she felt in the first moments after the horses and chariots disappeared, and the whirlwind that brought his master to glory was extinguished. It must have made him feel at least a little bit of loss and loneliness. But Elisha did not stand around looking up at the sky. He knew that Elijah's ministry was now his, that his life also had meaning. "Lord, where is Elijah's God?" he asked. And the answer soon came. Elijah's God was now with Elisha. The Lord's servants are gone, but the Lord's work continues. Elijah was a great hero of faith. But like everyone, his era is finally over. But despite the spectacular manner in which he left the world, the lesson for us is one that is quite ordinary. God's servants, including the greatest, will be gone, but the Lord's work continues. People have always craved importance. We want to find meaning and purpose in our lives, and sometimes we will have to do everything we can to find it. You may have everything else: money, health, happiness, possessions, even love. But if you don't have meaning in life, you'll become empty. We need to live a meaningful, valuable life that makes a difference. It was a terrible feeling to think that I could live and die without ever leaving a mark on anyone or anything. We want to be able to say, look, I'm somebody. My existence is important. My existence here has importance and purpose. I am not just the random result of some evolutionary process. I have meaning, the desire to be important. The desire for importance is a good thing. It is a sign of our creation in the image of God. It's a testament to the fact that we really matter. Each of us, every human life, is important. Important to God and important to God's kingdom. If you have really watched this far, with God's blessing, share it with your loved ones so that they can know about this as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to give us more motivation to create more videos about the Bible. We hope to see you again in the next video. May God bless you and protect you at all times. Amen.